David is one who, like, wow, his journey is full of these seasons of waiting on the Lord. I believe if he went right to kingship right away, he may have not been the victorious, he may have not been in that place where God said, hey, you're building my house, I'm going to build your house.
Yeah.
That he may have not ever got to that place. We don't know.
Hi, I'm Amy, and this is my tiny home. Welcome! Today, we have a guest, Nick, who is an executive pastor and worship leader in the area, and I am so excited to have him as we continue to talk about waiting on the Lord. If you haven't seen our most recent series on waiting on the Lord, be sure to check out all 4 parts where we talk in depth from Scripture about what God says in those seasons. I asked Nick to join me today because recently I was in the room as he was leading worship, and he just spontaneously started singing about waiting on the Lord, and I really felt the presence of the Lord, felt God really touching me, and so I thought maybe he would have some stuff to share. So welcome to my house, Nick.
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me. This is an honor. Obviously, Amy, thank you for opening up what you're doing here. This is a cool opportunity. So
It's his first time in my house.
Yep, it's pretty cool.
He said he kind of lived in a tiny house before.
Yep. Something similar to that, so that was fun.
Yeah.
I know that I'm used to, if I had a chance to live before family, before kids and stuff, before marriage, if I could live in a small little spot and put me in a mountain somewhere, I was ready for that.
Yeah, I'm like, where's the mountain I'm going to? Yeah, somebody show it to me.
Exactly.
So when you think of waiting on the Lord, what are the thoughts that start coming to your mind?
Well, I think a lot of different things can come to my mind personally over the years, because like as I was saying before, it's for me it's been different seasons. What you're waiting on the Lord for specifically, or what kind of season you're in. But in recent months, waiting on the Lord I've been more and more seeing it as not inactivity or not just disconnecting from God. I think a lot of times we can think waiting on the Lord as, okay, God, I'm taking my hands off of everything and I'm just letting you you're not actually engaging with Him, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And I know for me in these recent few months, it's just been like the Lord is saying, hey, I want you to, in these seasons of where you feel like there's not things moving forward or things happening or visibly happening in front of your eyes, I want you to engage. This is your invitation to engage with me, to get oil, to connect with my heart, and I kept getting this picture of, almost like you're like watching a movie, for example. Like if you're watching a movie and you're engaged with the movie, you're actually on the edge of your seat, you're waiting and anticipating what's happening in the movie, as opposed to just, I'm going to go and I'm not engaged with it. I'm going to, eat my candy, look down, do something else, and when it happens, it happens. So there's a very active part of waiting on the Lord that the Lord has really had me try to understand more and more in recent months. So.
Yeah, it reminds me of this thing I found on the great place of Facebook when I was building the house, which is a picture of a man leaning against a shovel, and it says something to the effect of, I'm just waiting on God to dig me a hole.
Wow.
And it was a picture I actually kept, and I would look at it regularly while building this house because I felt like God gave me a promise, and I'm the one with my dad that's supposed to actually participate with him to see it come to pass.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think Hebrews 11 talks about all these characters of faith, and when you look at something like that, even you see every one of their lives, they're actively going in a direction, and their faith is moving them in a direction. They're going somewhere, they're sacrificing something, they're leaving things behind, because they're living for a heavenly homeland. They're waiting for a promise that they've yet to, it says that they didn't even actually see a lot of the things that they were promised, but that yet they continued in faith. And so I look at that, and it's just a very active faith, a very active trusting in the Lord. And so that spoke to me a lot just in seasons of when you're, again, I think for me, it's mostly seasons when you have an expectation of certain things to happen, or a promise from the Lord or from the Scripture that you're actually anticipating, you're wanting to happen, but you're like, what do I do in the meantime? And when is it going to happen?
Totally.
Kind of
Are
thing.
there certain ways that you feel like you're engaging? Like, I feel like sometimes it's hard to know, what am I supposed to be doing?
Right. And I think for me too, I had to go down a lot of the wrong direction to kind of get some of that. I think, like, you think of Abraham, who was waiting on the Lord, and obviously there was a season where I think it was about 10 years after they had been promised, had a promise to have a son or have a child, that they would have the seed come forth from them. You have the Ishmael moment, right, where Sarah goes off and says, "Hey, here's my maidservant. Let's try to help God out."
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
And it's this moment of self-sufficiency of like, okay, maybe that, and in Abraham's mind, maybe it made sense to him, like, logically, maybe that's what God actually meant. So you start to reinterpret some things about what he had originally said, and obviously that I think that's in Genesis 13 through 15, somewhere in there. And you go through that and you see just how God didn't even though he failed, I would count that as a failure. You read, I think it's in Romans 4 and 5, I think somewhere in there, Romans 4 maybe, where it talks about, Paul writes and says, and Abraham's faith did not waver.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you've ever read that, where he says, I read that, I'm like, Paul, did you read the Bible? Because Abraham, when I read Abraham's journey, in my opinion, he wavered. There was like clear, he did something his own way and tried to produce a result that, on his own terms, try to trust God on his own terms. And I just think that encourages me, because God defined that season of waiting for him, and he didn't write it off as failure, but it was, he actually said he didn't waver because he actually, I think it was mostly because of his response to the situation. That obviously he had an Ishmael to prove his failure, like in our minds, but yet God was still able to use his heart of saying, God, I just want to engage with you. I'm gonna keep trusting you. And obviously, you can read through the story. We're not going to recap the whole story, but I just get encouraged by things like that. And someone has been influential in my life who passed away a few years ago was my grandfather. He was a Marine, military man, lived a lot of years in pain, and one of the things he gave me when I was younger, or several years ago, was a actual bow. A bow, and with bow and arrow, bow with a good string, and it was from when he was in the Marines.
Oh, wow.
And something the Lord spoke to me, even last year, just after a few years after he had passed, was during a season of trial for me, and waiting and even pain. The Lord he kept giving me that picture of a bow, and just like the strength of that bow is not being able to stay stiff.
Oh, that's good.
The strength of the bow is in its ability to bend. Like if you can't bend the bow, it can't release something. It can't launch something where it wants to go. So the strength of the bow is actually being able to hold on. The string's actually able to hold on to the bow itself, not break, but hold on, but be able to be bent. And so that was the image in my mind when I thought about having unwavering faith, like having a faith that waits on the Lord, that trusts him. It's, hey, are you able to not that you're gonna do it perfectly or flawlessly, you're gonna be so rigid about it, but you're gonna allow whatever's pushing you back, whatever's pulling you back, you're gonna use those as opportunities and invitations to submit further to God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was reading actually about Sarah this morning, the story where the three men come to Abraham. They're basically two angels and Jesus, a pre-incarnate Jesus. And Sarah's listening, I guess, through the tent to the promise that Abraham's receiving, and Sarah laughs in her heart, like, this is not going to happen. And actually, Abraham did the same thing. And then I, on a recent episode, was talking about Hebrews 11:11, where it says that Sarah received strength to conceive because she believed him to be faithful to his word. And I was just like, wait a sec, because she didn't really I mean, she
Exactly,
laughed
right,
at him. But I think it reminds me of Song of Solomon, of like being dark but lovely,
wow,
having a weak love, and that the Lord sees inside of us when we're really struggling to trust Him, struggling to walk and continue to wait, that if there is an ounce of faith in our heart, He sees that.
right,
And that's what He believes about us when we don't even regard ourselves as really trusting God.
right. Wow, yeah, and that's exactly right, I think, and I think it's in those moments where you realize your faith is weak, your love is weak, but it's lovely that it just says, okay, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah,
And
totally.
it's that little resolve that you have, even though it's weak and frail. It's saying, I'm still going to hold on. I'm being bent, I'm being pulled, but I'm just not going to let go. And it's just that little resolve that God can work with. And I think even when Jesus prayed for Peter, there's another image that comes to my mind where he said, the enemy is asked to sift you like wheat.
Oh my goodness.
And then he goes on to say, but it's okay because I prayed for you that your faith wouldn't fail.
Yes, Jesus prays for us.
Yeah. And he specifically says that your faith wouldn't fail. That that though it's gonna feel like failure, but I've prayed for you that your faith's not gonna it's gonna bend really really hard, but you're not gonna break. And so, thinking of that even gives me a greater just peace and strength, and knowing that okay, I can do this. And I think that's what God wants. He wants us in those. He wants us. Again, Abraham moved into self-sufficiency for those seasons where he produced an Ishmael, but it pushed him back into God's sufficiency. And I think that's what it is just constantly being realigned and put back into relying on his grace and his strength. And I think that's where waiting on the Lord is such a gift to learn how to do, and that the Lord teaches us. I mean, I think of it on this angle. Imagine if you're at, like, I have kids. I have 4 kids, but imagine if I never, like, as soon as my kids ask for something, I'm always immediately giving it to them.
Yeah.
And obviously,
Spoiled brats
right?
in that
Yeah,
house.
exactly. So if they have an expectation of something immediately every single time, there's no delay. There's no actual trust. There's no actual. It's just instantaneous. The culture, like the culture we live in, instant gratification. It's just, and so there's something I think parental and fatherly about the Lord that allows us a delay season, that in between season where He can cultivate something in us that we can't get if things were instant. Like, I can't develop the depth and richness and relationship with the Lord unless I have that waiting delay season.
Yeah, and then another thing I was thinking about too is, I hate even saying this because it feels so painful, but you appreciate things more when you had to go and wait for them. Mm-hmm. Like, what if, I don't even know why I thought this house would be done in 3 months. Don't ever think that, okay? It's a lie. It'll be way longer than that. Yeah. But I did genuinely believe that we were going to start at the beginning of June and be done by the time school started, which is crazy, which really set me up for heartache. But let's say the Lord did that. Mm-hmm. Probably there'd be no YouTube channel because it wasn't nearly as painful, and I didn't have to learn all those lessons. Plus, I sit in my house and I'm like, I can't believe it's here.
Right.
Because I went through that waiting time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that faith that's tested, that's gold is on the other side. It's like being proven like gold. There's like a value system there that God puts in us, and it takes that. And He knows just how we work. He knows what's going to form us and fashion us and change us. And when we choose to submit to that, I think there's power in that. And I know as one of the chapters that I had mentioned too, Isaiah 40, that comes to mind thinking about this, was another aspect of it, because in that chapter we know Isaiah 40:31, where it talks about those who wait. Plus, those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength, will rise up on wings like eagles. They shall walk and not faint, run and not grow weary. I think is what it says. Mm-hmm. But that's, if you've probably heard that analogy before, but where it talks about rising up like eagles on eagles' wings, those who wait upon the Lord. An eagle, in order to get to a certain altitude, they don't have to flap harder. They don't flap harder to fly higher. They just they just actually learn how to soar. They find the rising current and they spread their wings. And it's in that, it's that delay season again that does that too. That teaches you, if I'm going to exert myself more to in self effort, when I say, just to kind of clarify that, when I'm saying waiting in the Lord is an active thing, I don't mean an activity that's apart from abiding in Him. I don't mean self effort. I mean it's being stretched, just like an eagle's having to stretch its wings so that it can catch a current. And for me, that to bring it on a practical scale, that can look like, just, hey, maybe I have a scheduled time of prayer in my life, but hey, maybe I need to take a little season where I extend that, or I actually go further than I normally would, or I change some of my habits and routines around to actually, maybe I need to fast more, or maybe I need, and that's not coming from a self-effort mindset, but hey, God, I'm recognizing my weakness. I'm recognizing my inability. This is me stretching myself and saying, here, God, blow on me. Let me rise up not by me doing it in my own effort and strength, but just by simply doing these as acts of faith to trust you, trusting that you're gonna teach me, you're gonna show me, you're gonna help me.
And what are some indicators you've experienced or noticed in other people that they are relying on their own self-effort? Because that can be really hard to figure out that part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because you see, when we talk about any kind of spiritual discipline, right? You talk about doing things that we know are, as Christians, we're called to do, we're supposed to do, but it can look. I think of I guess it's the parable where Jesus talked about the publican coming in, and then he had the Pharisee who was up at the front praying, God, thank you that I'm not like these other people, basically. He's paraphrasing it.
Yeah.
And then you have the one that comes in that's just crying out for mercy, beating his chest, and he says whose prayer was heard. And so I think, because we know you can pray without praying.
Oh yeah.
You can fast without actually fasting. And there's for me, recognizing it first starts with myself. Like, I have to say for myself, there's seasons where it does become about self-effort and stuff like that, and that's the realigning has to happen. But I think the biggest indicator for me, when I'm looking at myself, starting with myself, and then I recognize it in people around me, of course, but the first thing is for myself is I think it's when it's revolving mostly around me. When my prayers, the reason why I want to fast, or it's the reason why, like, am I studying the Word of God because I want to hear from Him, or am I studying so that I can have a message to share with someone else, so I can sound like I heard from God,
or like what you're talking about?
Right. Like, it's those little heart moments. As the Lord always loves to do, He brings it back to the heart, and I need those disruptions of the Lord, because we're prone. I think we're naturally prone towards self-effort and doing things formally and externally. It's just natural to our humanity. So we need the Lord's help in that regard to help us to give us those indicators, and it's being willing to ask those questions over yourself, and like say, am I being honest?
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
What it comes down to.
Yeah, it makes me think of, am I doing this to twist God's arm and get Him to do what I want? Or am I doing this because I want to be formed into the image of Jesus? And I've noticed in myself, like maybe through fasting or whatever my plans are for my life, it's like, okay, this is my plan. And it sounds holy sometimes, because it's like, oh, well, you told me and I wrote the vision and I made it plain and I'm bringing it back to you. And the Lord's like, I didn't give you every detail of this vision.
Right.
So now you, like you said with the arrow, you've got to bend and submit to the Lord's leadership, preferably with a nice attitude about it, which is easier said than done.
Right.
So how, in your experience, have you seen your heart responding to the Lord's leadership when He moves you in a way you didn't expect?
Yeah, oof. Yeah, I think I said this the other day with some of the people in our church. I was talking about when you're sitting at a desk and you could have bad posture and you kind of just, you don't actually realize the pain that it's causing you until you have to get up, right? Or somebody, maybe says, hey, I need your help, and you get up and you have to move. When you have to make those movements, and when God moves you, you're going to recognize, hey, I've been sitting the wrong way. But if you're here, the thing is, if I'm not willing to have the right attitude and submit to it, I'm gonna inadvertently resort back, sit the same way I was always sitting, and I'm gonna have the same pain. So I just use that as just kind of an image in my life, because there's moments when God's moving things, and God moves me in ways that I'm uncomfortable, and it's usually indicated by it's going to be something that's uncomfortable. It could be like dealing with authority in your life, and people. I think a lot of times we blame the authorities in our life because of the situation we're in. If only they would do this and do this, then I would have a lot more, just like David and a Saul kind of thing. But Saul could never stop David from becoming what he was called to do. And so I think my first response isn't always the best and right thing. It's the flesh part of me wants us to complain, to put the blame on others, to blame authority, blame situations. And then by the grace of God, I believe he helps us. He helps us to see some things that, okay, and that's why going back to the Lord in prayer and honesty and humility, it's giving him that moment to say, all right, what you're feeling right now, what your response is wrong. Like I want to be able to I'll have those moments where I don't like the way I'm being moved. I don't like the situation I'm in, and I can grit my teeth all I want, but unless I get on my knees, I get in his word and let him speak, I'm not giving him an access point for him to really speak to me. Sometimes he does it despite my stubbornness, and I'm grateful for that. But other times he'll let you sit in that place until you're willing to humble yourself.
Yeah, what I'm hearing of what you're saying is it's important that we have a willingness to converse with God where we're actually hearing his perspective and not just only seeing our own perspective.
Right.
And I feel like there's a waiting on the Lord. I don't know, maybe everyone has this experience. I feel like my whole life is waiting on the Lord intensely, and it can be so emotionally uncomfortable. So do you have any thoughts about, like, what if someone is in a season really of intense waiting and they are genuinely struggling with maybe bitterness or struggling to come get the perspective of the Lord? How do they kind of get out of that rut and get back to what the Lord's leading them into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts with, first off, that willingness to humble yourselves in prayer and in the Word, and letting the Lord just wash over you with his word, with truth, and just to start to, I always say that, and I know it can be a cliche thing, but to just get back to raw humility over his word, and not coming with an agenda, not coming with a plan, but just letting him just speak. And I think my litmus test for my own heart is Am I doing this for me? Am I thinking about these things for selfish reasons, or for me, or for what? Am I willing to take a step back and let the Lord really just show me from his word what he's doing? I think just to kind of, I guess, make sense of it, maybe for others who are maybe listening to this too. I think a lot of times, if you're like me, I'm just trying to order my thoughts, because I want to say this clearly for everybody. For me, I like having my ducks in a row person. Not everybody's like that. One of my best friends is a fly by the seat of your pants kind of person, and he's okay with just whatever comes at my way. I'm just gonna, that's my life. that's just kind of his personality. But for me, I'm like, okay, I like the schedule. I like A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like logically, this makes sense. And so for me, and it could look different. Again, this can look slightly different for different people for sure. But for me, I got to be willing to say, God, if I'm at A, and I want to get to D, I got to be willing to say, sometimes it doesn't look like A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
Sometimes I got to be ready for start at A, then we go to F, then we go to, we don't just go down this, and I have to just, I feel like that's the pattern of how he leads his people throughout the scriptures. That's why I say go into the Word of God, because if you see how when I see how he leads someone like David, like David's a character. If you're specifically talking about waiting on the Lord, I love going through David. There's so many characters, obviously, that's all throughout the Bible and our whole life. But David is one who, like, wow, his journey is full of these seasons of waiting on the Lord. And I believe if he went right to kingship right away, he may have not been the victorious, he may have not been in that place where God said, hey, you're building my house, I'm going to build your house.
Yeah.
And that he may have not ever got to that place. We don't know. But because he had to have those lessons in the wilderness and on the run from Saul, it just taught it teaches you, right? It teaches you have to trust the Lord. And another thing that's helped me in those seasons too is to value. Think about it like this: David, when he was on the run from Saul, he's fighting. He's going all over Israel, right? Philistine territory. He's everywhere. He's in caves. He's on hills. And think about what he's learning. What kind of information is he learning? Well, not just the always the spiritual things, but if you look at it from a physical standpoint, he's actually one who would be the future military leader of the nation. He knows where every vantage point is. He knows where every hiding spot is, every little nook and place of the whole area. He learned it firsthand just because he didn't do it willingly. He was on the run from Saul. He was in a place of waiting for a promise. He was in a place of trusting the Lord. But when he becomes a king, he's able to drive out the Philistines out of the whole territory, pushing them back further than Saul ever did, because he had those years he knew the land. And so what I would say too is, like, when I say going back to the Word, realigning myself and being humble, it's also me learning to value these seasons that I'm in right now to the fullest extent. That God, the things that He's putting in me now and I'm learning now are going to be that much more. It's going to be that much more of a clear to me in years to come. I'm going to say, wow, because I don't always see it in the moment. But when I learn to value it and just embrace what the Lord is doing, doesn't mean we submit to the devil. It doesn't mean there's times where we have to resist what the enemy is doing, of course. But when we submit to what God is doing through it. I think that's what He can work with. And if we stay in that place, I think we win.
Yeah, totally. If you don't quit, you win.
Right.
There's a song about that.
Yeah, there you go.
So that actually I love your point about how David was literally scoping out the land. He knew his country, he knew his land, he knew his future strategy from a season he didn't choose.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of how from the time I started, so for reference, I taught elementary music before I came to grad school, and I taught for 4 years.
Wow.
And I really wanted to go to grad school. And I kept praying, Lord, please, I really want to go to grad school. Then the next year, I was convinced for lots of reasons, I think I talked about this in another episode, that I was going to be teaching abroad. I was going to go teach in India. Wow. I prayed about it. I had everything ready. The day before I submitted my application, the Lord sent my pastor's wife, who I didn't even know that well, who looked me in the eyes and said, if you are not totally sure the Lord told you to go, don't go. And she had no idea. Well, now I'm in a season where I realize, okay, God knew exactly why He made me stay at that school for 4 years, because I'm now going to be on the job market to be a music ed professor, and guess how many years you have to have a public school experience? Wow. 4 years.
Wow.
And if I had jumped the gun, I wouldn't have actually been able to continue on what God was going to ask me to do later. Mm-hmm. And eventually, like you're saying, everything will eventually become clearer, and you're going to see, whether in this age or the age to come, right, the intentionality of God.